And welcome back. We have Dr. Hulsmann with us today, and we are talking about deflation, the blessings of deflation. That's our first topic for this particular show. And one of the most interesting points that you just made, Guido, is that the price level itself is not something that we should really be concerned with.
Absolutely, right? Because, again, for the functioning of a market economy, it is never important how much money in the absolute people spend, but how that what they earn relates to the money that they have to spend on the goods that they need.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So an economy, and for companies, of course, this is the point of view of consumers. For companies, what is important is how much money they earn relative to how much money they need to spend on the factors of production, so on the laborers that they hire and raw materials that they buy and so on.
So let's ask you from a different angle. Can an economy have both price deflation, where prices are going down, and the economy is growing at the same time?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
And that is what we have observed in several instances
Is that what
in the
we
past.
want?
It is, well, I mean, as we have said before, ultimately the price level is not very relevant, but there's nothing that speaks against it. So if vigorous growth comes along with falling prices, that is not worse or better than any other form. We should just rejoice, and we should especially not fear this phenomenon of falling prices.
Well, we currently see some falling prices that we've seen consistently for the last 30 years in growth industries like electronics.
Exactly.
You know, TVs, computers,
Right.
and other technologies like LASIK eye surgery, where the cost is less. And
also think just of consumer goods that are not even electronics, but food and other things, toys, which have been growth industries on a planetary scale, right? Because we have the phenomenon of globalization, with the strong growth of the world economy, which have entailed diminishing prices for consumers in the West and in other countries, parts of the world economy.
So let me ask you this. We used an example in a show recently that I had with Doug French, where he described some examples from the 1880s in the United States,
Right.
which was the decade of fastest economic growth in U.S. history.
Exactly.
Yeah. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Curiously, this period was before the 1930s, when we had the Great Depression.
Yeah.
This period in the 1880s and 1890s was known as the Great Depression. Because it was a period of protectively falling prices, consumer goods prices in particular. But if we then look at the growth rates of that period, we find it was in fact the strongest growth period in all of American history.
Wow, that's very interesting. So, you know, I wanted to also go back into this other concept that you have about one of the advantages that deflation has, in that one of the most interesting that I got out of reading your book, Deflation and Liberty, is that it exposes the winners and the losers. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. What a deflation does is to, in our current monetary system, is to create problems for those who have inflated the money supply previously through fractional reserve banking in particular. So fractional reserve banks have issued created demand deposits way in excess of the money that their customers have deposited with them. And this benefits the banker and those customers who profit from the credits that they grant. But of course it goes to the disadvantage of all other market participants, because you increase the money supply and therefore the purchasing power per unit diminishes. As the money supply goes up, all things become more expensive, so the value of the dollar in the hands of all other people diminishes.
This would hurt people that are trying to save money, for sure.
Exactly. Now, what happens then in a deflation? If a deflation hits the economy, it creates problems for fractional reserve banks. They might not be able to continue their operations, might not be able to fulfill their contractual obligations, and as a consequence, they go bankrupt. So this is a problem for these banks and for their business partners. So the credit dries up and so on. So they are clearly the losers in this process. On the other hand, they are then the winners. The winners are all other people, because as a consequence of this deflation, the price level will diminish very dramatically. So their money buys more things. And also people who finance their investments less with credit, but more out of their own money, out of equity.
Mm-hmm.
So deflation benefits an equity economy, property owner
Right.
economy, to the detriment of a debt economy.
So I want to summarize this by something you wrote in Deflation and Liberty, that deflation entails visible misery for many people to the benefit of equally visible winners. This starkly contrasts with inflation, which creates anonymous winners at the expense of anonymous losers. Inflation is a secret ripoff.
Yes.
I thought that was a very interesting summary statement that you put in on that. Well, this is interesting. You just mentioned this concept. I want to go back to this as insofar as it may be a potential boon to savers. It seems to me that in a general deflationary economy, they would know that their purchasing power would go up over time, and it sounds like an incentive to me for them to save.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so, whereas people might be prone to save to start new businesses, but also let's talk about those who get hurt by deflation. Basically, it's all debtors, essentially.
That is true, right?
So,
because their revenue will diminish, and they still have to pay back the debt that they contracted at a higher price level in the past.
So from a practical perspective, deflation, if it were to happen suddenly, would be a psychological event most people couldn't survive. It would be really very difficult. But if it
Very
happened,
hard,
but if it was gradual, there would be a massive shift in psychology, and we all have the ability to adjust. And obviously, it would be better if it was gradual and then sudden, just like we wouldn't like hyperinflation.
Right, absolutely.
You're
right,
we
Michael.
cannot adjust if that is too quick.
In underlining this point that it would entail a shift in psychology, because we have been living now for almost 100 years in an inflationary monetary system, which has shaped not only the way we do business, but really the way we approach economic problems and economic decisions in everyday life.
Mm-hmm.
And this, of course, would profoundly change if we reverted to a more sound monetary system, which has a slight deflationary tendency, and it would bring us back closer also to the moral values that were held by our ancestors.
And on that particular point, in that late 19th century era, how young people were taught to provide for their own retirement is that they assumed that the money that they saved would retain and possibly even improve its value.
Absolutely.
And that is in such sharp contrast from what we have today with our paper, as you said, and I love this term, forced money, as paper money, and we're going to talk more about that in a little bit. But now we plan for our future to be our money to be worth less and less and less over time.
Today it's suicidal if you make your savings, for example, in cash. Right? You know that its purchasing power will be a third or something in 20 years or 25 years. So nobody has a strong incentive to keep dollars, but to spend them as fast as possible.
Well, I want to. I don't think we'll get through all of this before our next break, but we'll get started with this right now. I particularly loved in your book, Deflation and Liberty, which again I'm going to recommend to all of our listeners. You had a total of 6 reasons why deflation is the harbinger of liberty, as you call it. And I'll ask if you would please comment on each of them. First is stops inflation.
Yes, this is a very good thing. Deflation curtails the power of banks to create more money. So as a consequence, the amount of credit and money created by banks is not as big as before. It even diminishes. So there is no longer the redistribution. Also, this is the main negative impact of inflationary finance. It no longer redistributes real revenues to the benefit of bankers and the corporate customers, and to the detriment of all other people.
We're going to probably overlap some of your your answers are probably going to overlap because this is something that you understand so intimately, and our listeners understand so so little. So please excuse me as I go through this, and we try to approach it from the
Sure.
slightly different way. But the second harbinger of liberty you note, and you partially discussed it just now, is that it destroys the institutions that produce inflation.
Right.
And that's really cool.
Yes, this is a very nice thing about deflation.
Yeah. And so,
right before we said that ultimately the price level doesn't matter, right? From the overall point of view.
Right.
But again, if we have an inflationary situation, then certain people or certain institutions, again, banks, the financial sector, win at the expense of other people.
Right.
And in a deflation, it's the other way around. The financial sector is curtailed to some healthy proportion within the economy, and the winners are all those who spend their own money rather than money that they borrow.
Who save and actually engage in longer-term economic calculation.
Yes.
Which is actually, it supports a more moral society.
Yes.
So that's also good. Now we're going to run out of time even before I get through the question on this next one, but I'm going to even go ahead and say it anyway, and then we'll come back. The third harbinger you list is that it abolishes the advantage that the inflation-based debt finance enjoys over savings-based equity finance,
right.
Where basically wipes out debt but not equity.
Yes.
And so, but we're going to, so like I said, we didn't even have time to have you answer on that except for a yes. So we'll be coming back right after the break, folks. And so please stay with us. This is Radio Free Market, and I'm your host, Michael McKay. And with me is Dr. Guido Hulsmann. And we are talking about, at this particular segment of our show, the blessings of deflation. Please stay with us. We'll be right back.